train waits in Chicago like a polished promise. At Dearborn Station, on a platform full of steam, leather suitcases, pressed coats, and gloved hands, the Super Chief stands with the quiet confidence of something already famous. In the late 1930s, this was not just another train. It was a moving symbol of modern travel, and in time, it would be remembered as the Train of the Stars, because so many famous passengers chose it for the long run between Chicago, Illinois, and Los Angeles, California. But on departure day, before the fame settles around it, the Super Chief feels almost ceremonial. The evening light falls across its streamlined cars. Metal edges catch the last brightness of the sky. The windows glow softly, warm and inviting, like small lanterns waiting for night. There's no hurry here. Everything feels deliberate, calm, exact. Inside, the sleeping cars are already prepared. The bedding is crisp. The curtains are drawn just enough to soften the platform lights. The air feels cool, helped by the modern comfort that made the Super Chief different from older trains. This was one of the things passengers noticed immediately. The train did not simply carry them west, it carried them well. The ride was smooth, the cars were air-conditioned, the sleeping accommodations were private. Even before the train moved, it gave the impression of a hotel set gently in motion. When the whistles sound and the wheels begin to turn, Chicago slowly falls away behind glass and steam. The Super Chief leaves from Dearborn Station, and almost at once the journey becomes a study in motion and contrast. One moment the train is passing through the dense urban edges of the Midwest, and the next, the city opens into wider land, into long flat spaces where the horizon begins to matter. Outside, the darkness deepens. Inside, lamps cast a warm, honey-colored light over polished wood and silver service. This was one reason the train became so beloved. It did not only offer transportation, it offered a feeling of order and ease. Travelers settled into their compartments, hearing the steady, almost musical rhythm of the rails. The motion was strong, yet strangely gentle. It was the kind of travel that allowed a person to read, think, rest, or simply watch the world passing in fragments through the window. By the 1930s, the Super Chief already had a reputation for excellence. Passengers appreciated its modern air-conditioned cars, its private sleeping compartments, and the sense that everything on board had been arranged by people who understood comfort. The crews were known for their discipline and their polished service. Santa Fe did not treat the train as ordinary, and the passengers could feel that immediately. Even the smallest details seemed to carry intention. As the night moves forward, the train reaches Kansas City, Missouri, one of the important points on the route. Here, the journey breathes for a moment. The station activity, the brief exchange of passengers, the quiet bustle of rail staff, all of it creates a pause without breaking the rhythm. Kansas City is not a destination here. It is a threshold, a reminder that the train is already moving deeper into the American interior. And then, again, the rails carry the Super Chief onward. In 1938, the schedule included a line of places that read almost like a map of the continent, unfolding in sequence. Chicago, Kansas City, Newton, Dodge City, La Junta, Raton, Las Vegas, Albuquerque, Gallup, Winslow, Seligman, Needles, Barstow, San Bernardino, Pasadena, and Los Angeles. Some of these were full stops, others were service stops where the train barely paused, as if it were taking a breath before continuing west. But every name belonged to the route's identity. Each station marked a change in climate, landscape, and feeling. At this hour, however, the traveler does not yet think of all that. The first sensation is simpler: the comfort of being carried. Breakfast will come later, coffee will come later. For now, the train moves steadily into the night, and the country around it becomes quieter, broader, and more open. Somewhere beyond the windows lie the plains of Kansas, the first hints of the long western journey. The super chief crosses them with elegant restraint, as if it already knows the whole route and has no need to prove itself. That was part of its magic. The train did not rush, it glided, and in that gliding motion, with warm light inside and endless night outside, the super chief begins its by dawn. The super chief has already left the city behind. The night gives way slowly, almost reluctantly, and the first light of morning spreads across the land in pale silver bands. Outside the window, the country is open now. Not narrow streets or station lights, but broad, quiet distance. The train moves through the vast middle of America with that same steady elegance that made it famous. The rails sing beneath it, and the windows catch the changing sky. Inside the sleeping car, the morning begins without noise. There is no clatter, no harsh interruption, only the soft order of a train that knows exactly how to wake its passengers. Curtains part gently, lamps are switched on. The air is cool and clean. Somewhere in the corridor, footsteps are light and measured. A porter passes with the quiet professionalism that defined first-class rail travel in those years. This was one of the great pleasures of the super chief. It made time feel refined. Even breakfast seemed to belong to a different world. If the traveler requested it, a morning cup of coffee could be brought directly to the private compartment. Not the hurried coffee of a station diner or the lukewarm cup of an ordinary coach ride, but a proper morning ritual. Hot, fragrant, and delivered as though the day itself had been carefully arranged for comfort. It was a small service, but one that said everything about the train's character. The super chief did not simply transport its passengers, it cared for them. And beyond the glass, the land begins to change. The line carries the train through Kansas City, and then onward into Newton, a place listed in the 1938 schedule as a service stop, where the motion is brief, but the presence is felt. The train may not linger long there, but the name itself becomes part of the journey's rhythm. Each stop marks a subtle shift, more sky, more distance, more openness. The prairie seems to stretch farther here than the eye can comfortably follow. Soon after, the super chief reaches Dodge City, a name that still carries the memory of the American frontier. By the 1930s, the wildness that once defined the region had long since been tamed by rail, roads, and towns. But the name still holds a certain romance. To pass through Dodge City on a train like this is to feel the country's older history still whispering beneath modern travel. The station is not only a place to arrive or depart, it is a reminder that the West once had to be reached slowly with determination and often in discomfort. The super chief makes that old hardship feel almost unimaginable, and that is exactly why it fascinated people. The train represented what modern American travel could become when speed was combined with luxury, discipline, and design. By the late 1930s, it was already earning admiration from travelers who recognized the difference immediately. The air-conditioned cars, the private sleeping sections, the careful smoothness of the ride, and the first-class crews all separated it from ordinary rail service. There was no sense of compromise on board. Everything was deliberate, polished, and reliable. That sense of reliability matters, especially as the route continues west into land that feels increasingly expansive. The plains become drier. The horizon grows more severe. The color of the earth shifts. The light sharpens. The day advances and the train moves deeper into the geography of the American Southwest. At La Junta, Colorado, the train pauses again, a service stop in 1938, but an important one in the emotional shape of the journey. The air here feels different, even imagined from inside the carriage. There's a faint sense that the landscape is preparing for something grander. The plains no longer feel entirely flat. The land begins to gather itself. Far away, the contours of mountains seem to wait just beyond the visible edge. Then comes Raton, New Mexico, another service stop, and with it, the first strong suggestion that the Super Chief is climbing toward more dramatic country. The famous Raton Pass lies ahead, one of the route's memorable points and one of the places Santa Fe chose to highlight for its passengers. The company understood that the journey itself was part of the attraction. To that end, 7 signs were placed along the route to identify notable landmarks, including the Continental Divide and Raton Pass. These signs were not merely functional. They turned geography into experience. They invited passengers to understand where they were, to look out and see not just scenery, but significance. That was very much in keeping with the Super Chief's identity. It did not rush people past the land, it framed the land. As the train nears the pass, the atmosphere inside becomes especially calm. There's something about mountain travel that changes the way a person listens. The rails seem more purposeful. The car sways in a new rhythm. The engine works with a greater effort, though inside the passenger compartments the motion remains smooth, almost invisible. This is part of the magic of the Super Chief. It hid the strain of distance. It made even difficult terrain feel effortless. By now, the dining car is in full use. The Fred Harvey Company operated the dining service, and that alone gave the train a special reputation. These were not improvised meals thrown together for convenience. They were properly prepared courses served by a staff trained in one of the most respected traditions in American rail travel. The dining cars themselves were usually 36-seat cars, though many could be converted to 48 seats, with the addition of folding tables and chairs when needed. At nearly all times, a lounge car followed the dining car, offering a bar and a place to wait when the dining room was full. That arrangement gave the train a very particular social texture. Passengers did not just eat and retreat. They moved through the cars, settled into the lounge, talked softly, watched the scenery, and waited their turn in a world that felt orderly and elegant. Everything had its place. Everything had its pace, and the food itself became part of the train's legend. The continental cuisine served aboard the Super Chief was said to exceed the usual standards of American rail dining, and, in many cases, rival the food of 5-star restaurants. Breakfast could be simple or elaborate. Lunch was ordered from a menu. Dinner might be chosen a la carte or as a table d'hôte meal. The evening offerings could include caviar, cold salads, grilled fish, sautéed fish, tenderloin steaks, filet mignon, lamb chops, and other refined dishes that made the journey feel like a moving grand hotel. For passengers with a taste for elegance, there were also champagne dinners. And then, there was the Santa Fe French toast, a version of pain perdu that became one of the train's beloved signature dishes. It had the kind of name that sounds almost too simple for something so memorable, yet it fit the spirit of the route perfectly. Classic, comforting, and quietly luxurious. Meals like this were not just nourishment. They were part of the memory of the trip. The interior decoration reinforced that feeling. The table linens, the serving pieces, the dishes, even the atmosphere of the dining cars reflected the train's Southwestern identity. Mary Coulter, the architect and designer known for her deep understanding of native art and her long service with Fred Harvey, created the china and silverware designs for the Super Chief. Her work drew on animal pictographs and geometric motifs from ancient pottery found in the Mimbres River Valley of southwestern New Mexico, dating back to around 1100 AD. Those patterns connected the train to the deep past of the region, long before the era of railroads, and gave its dining service a distinctive visual language. That is one of the reasons the Super Chief felt different from the famous trains of Europe. It was not trying to imitate old world aristocracy. It was creating something distinctly American, modern, luxurious, and rooted in the landscapes of the Southwest. The train's style did not come from chandeliers and imperial salons. It came from desert light, native design, adobe architecture, and the careful blending of comfort with regional identity. That gave it a personality all its own. As the morning continues, the passenger notices how much the land itself has entered the story. The train crosses places where the earth seems older and more exposed, where the sky becomes enormous, and where the horizon takes on a near spiritual importance. The Continental Divide is not simply a geographic fact. Aboard the Super Chief, it becomes a moment of recognition. You are crossing from one side of a continent to another. The route is no longer just a line on a map. It is a sequence of experiences, each one linked to the next by rail and time. By the time the train approaches Las Vegas, New Mexico, the landscape feels almost cinematic in its openness. Then comes Albuquerque, a more substantial point on the route, and later Gallup, Winslow, and the long western stretch that suggests California not as an endpoint but as a promise. Each place names a different world of rock, sky, and distance. The route has its own geography of memory, and the Super Chief moves through it with calm authority. But even at this stage, the journey is not yet about arrival. It is about the state of being in motion. Passengers read. Some converse in low voices. Others sit by the window, watching for changes in the land. A few drift into the lounge car. Some may think of the celebrities who also rode this train during its peak years, helping to earn it the nickname, the Train of the Stars. That nickname did not come from publicity alone. It came from the train's reality. Famous travelers did ride it often enough between Chicago and Los Angeles that the name stuck naturally, almost affectionately, as if the nation itself had decided that this was the proper way to cross the continent. And yet, for all its prestige, the Super Chief did not feel theatrical. It felt composed. That is what the passenger senses most in these hours, the quiet certainty that the journey has been designed to remove strain. The seats are comfortable. The rooms are private. The food is excellent. The staff is attentive without intrusion. The movement is smooth. Even the noise of the rails seems softened, transformed into a kind of traveling music. The farther west the train moves, the more the daylight sharpens around it, and the more the journey begins to feel like a passage through a slowly unfolding American epic. But it is still, at heart, a restful experience, and one of distance made gracious, and of travel made humane. By afternoon, the mountains and desert ahead begin to hint at what comes next. And somewhere beyond those horizons, the Super Chief continues west, carrying with it the confidence of a train that knows it is not merely crossing America. It is defining what luxurious. By midday, the Super Chief is no longer simply crossing America. It is crossing a mood. The land outside has changed so much that the train feels as if it has entered another world entirely. The broad plains of the central route are now behind it. In their place come the ochre tones of the southwest, the hard edges of distant mesas, the pale sky stretched over empty distances, and the dry brilliance of daylight that seems to sharpen everything it touches. The train moves forward with the same effortless grace, but the scenery has become more dramatic. more exposed, more elemental. Inside, the carriages remain calm and polished, insulated from the harshness of the world outside. Curtains soften the light. The air stays cool. The carpeted aisles absorb sound. Passengers move through the train as if through a private traveling house, one that has been designed to carry them through mountains, desert, and distance without ever disturbing their comfort. That contrast is part of what made the Super Chief so admired. Outside, rock, heat, sky, silence. Inside, linen, silver, service, and soft light. After leaving the plains behind, the route brings the train deeper into New Mexico, and with each mile the landscape becomes more distinctive. This is no longer the anonymous middle of the country. This is a place with identity. The names themselves begin to feel memorable, even musical. Rayton, Las Vegas, Albuquerque, Gallup. On the 1938 timetable, several of these were listed as service stops, but even where the train paused only briefly, the route carried meaning. At Rayton, the traveler senses the first great transition. The air seems thinner, the light clearer. The train works a little harder here, though from inside the passenger cabin, the effort is mostly hidden. That was one of the great achievements of the Super Chief. It transformed difficulty into smoothness. Mountain travel, which could once have felt exhausting or disruptive, became something elegant and almost serene. The route's designers knew that the journey should be more than a line between cities. So Santa Fe placed 7 signs along the line to mark notable points, including landmarks such as the Continental Divide and Raton Pass. These were not merely markers for the practical traveler. They were invitations to look, to notice, to feel the route as a series of significant moments. In the age of the Super Chief, the rail journey was not meant to vanish into efficiency. It was meant to be seen and remembered. That is why this section of the ride feels so powerful. The train begins to enter the kind of country that makes people sit by the window without speaking. The desert has a way of slowing thought. It is not empty exactly, it is open. The difference matters. In the wide spaces of New Mexico, the land does not demand attention by force. It commands it by silence. Mesas rise in the distance like old fortresses. The horizon seems farther away than it should be. Light pools over the land in long golden stretches, even the shadows appear deliberate. And the Super Chief passes through all of it like a moving line of refinement. By the time the train reaches Las Vegas, New Mexico, the passenger has already begun to feel the rhythm of the Southwest. Then comes Albuquerque, one of the major points on the route, where the desert world grows richer in detail. There is a strong feeling here of movement between eras, the ancient land outside, the modern train inside, and the nation itself, in the process of learning how to connect the two. The Super Chief did that better than most. It was modern, certainly. It was fast, comfortable, and carefully maintained. But it was also deeply aware of place. The train did not hide the identity of the Southwest. It highlighted it. The dining service, the decor, the design choices, even the route itself all contributed to a feeling that this was not just rail travel. It was a curated experience of the American West. And in no place does that feeling become clearer than at Gallup. Gallup has long been associated with the cultural crossroads of the region. And aboard the Super Chief, it appears as a name that seems to gather the Southwest into itself. The landscape around it feels textured, layered, and historical. The train may only service the stop, but the impression remains. The passenger understands, perhaps without fully articulating it, that the route is not simply moving through scenery. It is moving through a living geography of trade, culture, and memory. There's another subtle pleasure in this part of the journey. The train's ability to make distance feel luxurious. Ordinary travel often makes distance feel like inconvenience. The Super Chief does the opposite. It turns space into atmosphere. The longer the ride continues, the more the passenger settles into the rhythm of the train. Time becomes soft around the edges. One begins to measure the day, not by hours, but by stations, meals, sunlight, and the changing color of the land. Somewhere after lunch, the dining car continues to do its quiet work of elevating the day. A proper meal on the Super Chief was never hurried. The Fred Harvey service made sure of that. The setting was elegant, but not cold. The tableware, designed by Mary Coulter, carried those distinctive Southwestern motifs. The animal forms, the geometric lines, the deep connection to ancient Mimbres imagery. The result was not decorative excess, but identity. You felt where you were. You felt the region in the objects before you, in the patterns on the china, in the polished silverware, in the way the meal belonged to its route. That is a rare kind of luxury. Not luxury as abstraction, but luxury with a sense of place. The menu reinforced the experience. The train's reputation for food was not exaggerated. Passengers could expect a standard that went beyond ordinary railroad dining. Refined dishes, careful presentation, and the kind of attentive service that made the meal itself feel like part of the destination. The famous Santa Fe French toast may have belonged more to breakfast, but the memory of it contributed to the train's mythology all day long. Likewise, the more elaborate dinners, with seafood, fine cuts of meat, and elegant accompaniments, gave the Super Chief the atmosphere of a moving restaurant in the grand style. Yet even after the meal, the traveler's attention returns to the window. Past Albuquerque and Gallup, the country grows more severe again. The route heads toward Winslow, Arizona, a name that feels almost like a hinge in the landscape. Here the desert becomes more pronounced, and the sense of forward motion becomes almost hypnotic. The passenger begins to feel the scale of the trip. This is not a short express between nearby cities. This is a transcontinental passage that takes time, about 40 hours from beginning to end, and every hour has been carefully shaped. That length matters. If the journey were shorter, the Super Chief would lose something essential. Its power lies partly in the fact that it allows the traveler to inhabit distance. The route is long enough for rhythm to emerge, long enough for meals to become events, long enough for the passing scenery to develop a narrative of its own. By the time the train reaches Arizona, the traveler is no longer merely a passenger. He or she has become part of the journey's tempo. There's also a unique pleasure in seeing the country transition from one climate to another without interruption. Outside the window, the Southwest reveals itself in layers. Sunlit rock, dry washes, distant ridgelines. The occasional settlement, wide space in every direction. And through it all, the train continues with its unwavering poise. The locomotives, sleek and forceful, pull the polished cars over long stretches of desert with a sense of purpose that never quite feels mechanical. It feels almost ceremonial. The Super Chief had that quality. It was modern, yes, but never cold. Efficient, but never impersonal. Powerful, but never harsh. That balance is part of why passengers responded to it so strongly. They were not merely transported, they were accompanied. As the afternoon lengthens, the desert light begins to change. The sun lowers slightly and the colors around the train grow warmer then softer. The shadows stretch, the rocks take on deeper tones of red and brown. The sky seems even larger than before. In the compartments, some passengers rest, others read, Others simply watch. There's no need to speak much in such a setting. The journey itself provides enough company. And now, as the train nears the edge of Arizona's long western reach, one can begin to feel California somewhere ahead, not as a vague promise, but as a real destination approaching over the horizon. That is the great emotional trick of the Super Chief. It makes the continent feel both enormous and intimately knowable. You sense the scale of America in the distance between stations, but you also sense a kind of order in the way the train holds that distance together. Every stop, every meal, every stretch of silence is part of a larger design, and because of that, the passenger never feels lost, only carried. By the time the train moves farther west, the daylight will deepen again, and the land will begin to flatten into another kind of openness. The approach toward the California border, the desert settlements, the rail yards, the long final stretch of the route. But for now, the Super Chief is still in the great middle of the Southwest, where the land is spare and beautiful, and where travel itself feels like something worth lingering in. By late afternoon, the Super Chief has begun to feel like a world of its own. The passengers have settled into the rhythm of the train so completely that the outside world seems almost distant, as if it belongs to another time. Inside the carriages, everything remains composed and calm. Polished wood, soft lamps, white linen, the quiet passing of stewards, and the steady hush of wheels against rail. Yet beyond the windows, the land has become sharper, more severe, and in a strange way, more beautiful than before. This is the part of the journey where the West feels vast enough to humble even a luxury train. After the country of New Mexico comes the wide openness of Arizona, and with it a new kind of silence. The desert here is not empty in the way people sometimes imagine. It is alive with distance. It is a place where light, shadow, and color seem to have been reduced to their purest forms. Red earth, pale sky, long lines of rock, a horizon so large it feels almost architectural. The Super Chief moves through it with the calm certainty of a train that knows exactly what it is doing. At Winslow, Arizona, the name alone already carries a certain romance, but aboard the Super Chief, it becomes part of a larger atmosphere. The station passes in a brief service stop, and then the train is on its way again, slipping back into the desert light. Nothing about the motion feels abrupt. Everything remains smooth, almost graceful, even when the land around it seems severe and raw. There's something deeply satisfying in that contrast. Outside, the terrain can look uncompromising, dry washes, open stretches, distant ridgelines. The occasional structure standing alone against the sky. Inside, passengers are protected from all hardship. They can lean back into private sleeping compartments, order coffee, sit in the lounge, or simply watch the scenery drift by like a living painting. The Super Chief did not just cross the desert, it made the desert feel refined. That was one of Santa Fe's great achievements with this train. By the time the route reaches Seligman, Arizona, the day has changed in tone. The light is lower now, softer but more dramatic. The shadows begin to stretch across the land, and the colors deepen into rust, amber, and dust-colored gold. Seligman itself, like the other service points on the line, is less about lingering and more about continuity. The train's brief pause is enough to remind the traveler that this long journey is not floating above the nation. It is connected to it, one station at a time, and yet the experience on board remains remarkably serene. Passengers often remember the Super Chief not only for its luxury but for its pace. A journey lasting about 40 hours from start to finish could have felt tiring in another setting. Here, it became almost meditative. The hours were long enough to let the mind unwind. a traveler could read for a while, then look out the window, then move to the dining car, then rest, then wake to a different landscape. Time on the Super Chief was not compressed. It was arranged. That arrangement mattered. It allowed the journey to become part of the pleasure. Not a waiting period between departure and arrival, but the experience itself. As the train continues west, the desert begins to change again. The country becomes drier, the space more open, and the route starts drawing closer to the long, final stretches toward California. The names themselves take on a special weight now: Needles, Barstow, San Bernardino, Pasadena. These were not just points on a rail line. They were markers of arrival, each one carrying the passenger further toward the Pacific side of the continent. At Needles, California, the train crosses into a new state and a new atmosphere. The change may be subtle from the inside of the carriage, but emotionally it matters. California is now real, not imagined. The western half of the journey is no longer ahead in theory. It is under the wheels. Needles has the kind of name that feels fitting for the desert. Hard-edged, memorable, slightly severe. It belongs to the landscape of heat and distance. And yet the Super Chief passes through it with the same elegant composure it has carried since Chicago. There is no sense of strain. The train does not break the mood. It deepens it. Later comes Barstow, another important stop on the route, and a place where rail travel in the Southwest carries a practical weight, as well as an atmospheric one. The train remains in motion, yet the stop gives a brief moment of orientation. Travelers can sense the geometry of the route now. They are moving toward the coast, toward the final urban stretch, but still within the long, open architecture of the desert. If the East Coast luxury trains were often remembered for polished interiors and formal etiquette, the Super Chief had something different. It had the feeling of landscape built into its identity. The carriages were elegant, certainly. The service was superb. But the soul of the train came from its route through the Southwest. Its luxury did not sit apart from the land. It belonged to it. That is why even the dining experience felt unique. By this stage of the day, many passengers have returned again to the dining cars or lounge. The Fred Harvey service remains calm, exact, and gracious. The train's food service had an almost legendary reputation by then, and with good reason. Meals were prepared with care, served with discipline, and presented in a manner that made even a simple dinner feel ceremonial. The dining room on the Super Chief was not ornate in the old European sense. It was something more regional and more distinctly American. The Southwestern style appeared everywhere. In the china designed by Mary Coulter, in the silverware, in the table settings, and in the small details that gave the car a memorable character. Coulter's designs drew from ancient Mimbres motifs, animal figures, and geometric patterns from pottery found in the Rio Mimbres Valley, dating to around 1100 AD. That meant the train's dining room was not merely stylish. It was connected to the deep history of the region through design. That detail mattered because it made the Super Chief feel rooted rather than borrowed. The train was modern, but it did not pretend to be European. Its elegance came from the American Southwest, the desert, the native visual tradition, the architecture and colors of the region, the sense of open land and bright light. This gave the entire journey a distinctive identity that no other famous train quite shared. And as the route nears San Bernardino, then Pasadena, that identity becomes even more interesting because the landscape begins to shift from dry desert toward the built edges of Southern California. The open country gradually gives way to more settled terrain. There's a sense of approaching civilization after a long, deliberate crossing of space. But the approach does not feel abrupt. Instead, it feels earned. The train has carried its passengers through plains, mountains, canyons, desert, and long stretches of silence. By now, the traveler has lived inside the rhythm of the rails for so long that the final miles feel almost ceremonial. The closer the Super Chief gets to Los Angeles, the more it seems to preserve the dignity of distance before surrendering it. And that is perhaps why people remembered it so vividly. The Super Chief did not simply deliver passengers from one city to another. It gave them a narrative of America. It allowed them to feel the country changing beneath the wheels. It made them notice climate, elevation, light, and culture. It made the route itself into an experience of refinement. Somewhere in these last desert hours, the passenger might think back to the beginning, to Chicago, to the station lights, to the polished departure, to the early confidence of the train as it set out west. That memory now feels far away, almost like a different day. The train has traveled so much farther than a map would suggest. It has created its own internal geography of comfort and expectation. Even the famous nickname, Train of the Stars, feels appropriate here. Not because the journey is glamorous in a shallow sense, but because the Super Chief turned ordinary distance into something worthy of admiration. Celebrities rode it, yes, between Chicago and Los Angeles, but so did travelers who simply wanted to feel what first-class rail travel could be when done with absolute care. The star quality of the train came from its consistency. Every detail seemed to say, this is how a journey should feel. Now, with California more fully present beyond the window, the light changes again. The air becomes different. The dry western atmosphere softens slightly. The colors shift. There's a feeling that the land is preparing to open into something broader and more inhabited. Urban edges will soon appear. Stations will become more frequent. The long desert hush will begin to yield to city life. But for the moment, the Super Chief remains in that rare in-between state, not quite finished with the wilderness, not yet arrived in the city. And in that space, the journey is at its most memorable. The passenger may not say much. There is often no need. The scenery, the service, the rhythm of the wheels, the cool air inside the carriage, and the growing awareness of California ahead are enough. Everything the train has offered so far, comfort, elegance, history, and a sense of place, seems to gather into this final stretch. The Super Chief glides on through the last wide spaces of the desert, carrying its quiet legend westward. The desert does not end all at once. It loosens its grip gradually, almost politely, as if it understands that the journey should not be broken too suddenly. After the long stretches of Arizona and the final miles through the California desert, the Super Chief begins its approach with a change so subtle that only a careful traveler would notice it at first. The air softens. The light changes. The land slowly becomes more settled, more inhabited, more intricate. By now the passenger has been inside the rhythm of the train for so long that the outside world feels almost ceremonial. Every turn of the rail, every station name, every shift in color across the horizon seems to carry meaning. This is no longer simply travel. It is arrival taking shape. At San Bernardino, the desert begins to give way to the first signs of Southern California's human geography. Roads become more visible. The land looks less severe. There are hints of orchards, buildings, and the long, low spread of city edge life. The great emptiness of the Southwest does not vanish, but it begins to share the stage with more familiar forms of civilization. Then comes Pasadena, a name that sounds gentler, almost floral, after the hard-edged beauty of the desert. The train's brief passage through this part of California carries a special feeling, because it marks the final transition from long-distance Western travel into the urban world of Los Angeles. The passenger senses that the journey's grand silence is nearly over, and yet the Super Chief does not hurry. That was always one of its greatest qualities. Even near the end, it retained dignity. It never rushed passengers toward a finish line. Instead, it let the ending come naturally, in stages, with enough time to appreciate the distance already covered. After nearly 40 hours on the move, that gentleness mattered. The train had become a temporary home, and it treated its passengers as if it knew they would remember not only where they went, but how they felt getting there. Inside the cars, the atmosphere remains composed. A steward passes quietly through the corridor. A porter folds a blanket. In the lounge, a few passengers may be speaking in low voices, but most simply watch the last changing light. Some are freshening up in their compartments before arrival. Others are gathering their bags, though there is no true hurry. There is still a sense of being carried, still time before the final stop. And in those final miles, the Super Chief feels almost symbolic. This was the train that had become known in its peak years as the Train of the Stars, because so many famous passengers rode it between Chicago and Los Angeles. That nickname is fitting here because the approach to Los Angeles seems made for glamour without ever becoming gaudy. The train does not announce itself with noise. It arrives with poise. It lets the city come to it. As the rails lead inward, the traveler begins to feel the difference between the desert west and Southern California. The atmosphere becomes less severe. The sky seems slightly hazier, less stark than it had been in Arizona. There is a softening in the horizon. The land is still spacious, but now it is filled with signs of life, tracks, buildings, streets, and the broader geography of a city that has spread across light and distance. For many passengers in the 1930s, this arrival would have felt like entering a new kind of American dream. Los Angeles, in that era, was already associated with motion, sunlight, industry, and possibility. It was not yet the fully mythologized metropolis. It would become later, but it had a special energy, part destination, part promise. To arrive there by rail on the Super Chief was to step into the West by a route that felt both modern and elegant. The train did not merely bring you to California. It staged your arrival. And what an arrival it was. The train's final approach carries a deep, almost satisfying calm. After the long desert stretches, after the mountain grades and service stops and dining room rituals, the city appears like a reward. It arrives not with drama, but with inevitability. The passenger has crossed a continent and is now being delivered into a new climate of life. The final stations and urban edges come closer. The motion becomes slightly more complex, more layered. The sounds of rail activity increase. There are more signals, more structures, more evidence of a city preparing to receive the train. Yet even here, the Super Chief maintains its own character. It remains polished and measured. Nothing feels messy. Nothing feels accidental. That is the experience Santa Fe had perfected. The train was not only a transportation service, it was a composition. The route, the schedule, the interiors, the food, the service, the scenic markers, all of it worked together to create a coherent journey from the Midwest to the Pacific side of the continent. The passenger did not merely pass through places. They felt each place enter the larger rhythm of the trip. By the time the train nears Los Angeles, the sense of completion is almost physical. The long hours of motion have become part of the body's memory. The rocking rhythm, the cooled air, the taste of coffee, the hush of the dining car, the view of mesas, desert flats, mountains, and western sky. These impressions do not remain separate. They blend into one continuous experience of the Super Chief. That is why the train inspired such devotion. It offered not just speed or luxury, but continuity. It made a continent feel traversable in comfort. And because the train was so closely associated with celebrities, journalists, business travelers, and those who valued refinement, its arrival in Los Angeles carried a particular social glow. One could imagine famous faces stepping off in tailored coats, carrying themselves with the same composed elegance the train had given them. But the beauty of the Super Chief was that it did not reserve its dignity for stars alone. Every passenger could feel, for a time, that they belonged to the same world of polished motion and quiet privilege. That was the real meaning of the Train of the Stars. Not only that stars rode it, but that the train itself seemed to have a kind of radiance. Now, as the wheels carry the cars into the final stretch, the journey begins to feel almost timeless. The sun may be lowering, or it may be morning, depending on the exact schedule, but the arrival has its own light. It feels like a moment suspended between past and future. Behind the passengers is the full arc of the route. Chicago, Kansas City, Newton, Dodge City, La Junta, Raton, Las Vegas, Albuquerque, Gallup, Winslow, Seligman, Needles, Barstow, San Bernardino, Pasadena. Ahead is Los Angeles, waiting with its warmth and traffic and urban spread. The train is not simply entering a station, it is closing a story. And yet, even at the end, the Super Chief preserves the mood of the journey. The passengers do not feel abruptly released from the experience. They feel gently returned to the world. The doors, when they open, will release them into California air. But the train itself lingers in memory like a well-composed evening. There's a reason people remembered this journey so vividly in the 1930s and after. The Super Chief was not just about getting from one end of the country to the other. It was about how the country looked when seen in motion, how comfort could coexist with distance, how service could shape perception, and how the Southwest could be introduced not as a hardship, but as a grand and beautiful passage. It was a train that made travel feel civilized without dulling its wonder. As the platform of Los Angeles comes into view, the sound of the wheels begins to change. The station activity grows clearer. The final movement is near. Inside, the passengers gather their things. A suitcase is lifted. A coat is buttoned. A window shade is adjusted one last time. Someone takes one final look at the line of cars, at the polished corridor, at the soft lamps still glowing against the fading day. And then, the train arrives. The Super Chief, after its long glide across the continent, settles into Los Angeles with all the grace it has shown from the start. No sudden flourish, no strain, just arrival, measured, elegant, complete. For the traveler, the journey is over. But the feeling of it, the calm and the distance, and the moving beauty of the American West remains. Los Angeles does not feel final for long. Even after the Super Chief has arrived, even after the doors have opened and the passengers have stepped onto the platform, the train itself still seems to hold a kind of motion in reserve, as if it is only pausing before the next grand departure. The station lights glow against the evening air. Porters move with practiced efficiency. Voices rise and fall in the background. Cars and taxis wait nearby. And above it all, The long, polished body of the train stands in the mild California night, like a machine that has learned how to be elegant. For many travelers, arrival in Los Angeles was a moment of satisfaction, but not of finality. The city was a destination, yes, but it was also a place of movement, entertainment, meetings, production, and reinvention. People did not simply come here to stop, they came here to continue. That was one reason the Super Chief fit the city so well. It belonged to a world in which motion itself had become glamorous. At the platform, the scene is quiet but alive. Some passengers have that after-journey look, a little tired, a little reflective, and yet still carrying the smooth composure the train has given them. Their coats are gathered. Their luggage has been handled with care. A porter offers assistance without fuss. The conversation is restrained, almost ceremonial. After 2 days of rhythm and refinement, nobody wants to break the spell too abruptly. This was one of the things that made the Super Chief memorable. It did not end the journey with noise. It ended with atmosphere. The train's reputation had grown so strong by the late 1930s that it was spoken of almost as a moving institution. It was faster than many other long-distance services, more refined in its interiors, and more carefully cultivated in its public image. But its real greatness lay in the way it joined form and feeling. The compartments were comfortable, the service superb, the dining first-rate, but the deeper experience was emotional. It made the passenger feel that the continent could be crossed not just efficiently, but beautifully. And now, in Los Angeles, that beauty takes on a new expression. The station itself becomes part of the memory. The last calls of the crew, the movement of baggage, the quiet unloading of the train's human cargo, all of it creates a scene that feels almost like the final act of a play. The travel day is expanded across so many hours and landscapes that the arrival is less a conclusion than a change of key. Some passengers are here for business, others for film, glamour, or rest. The names associated with the Super Chief still hover in the background. Entertainers, stars, executives, writers, and those who wanted to be seen riding the finest train of the age. The nickname Train of the Stars feels especially appropriate in a city like Los Angeles, where fame and travel seem naturally connected. Yet the train's glamour was never shallow. It was grounded in real quality, in exact service, and in the confidence of a route that had become legendary. There is also another kind of beauty at this hour. The beauty of the train at rest. When a train like the Super Chief stands under station lights, it looks almost architectural. The windows reflect the platform glow. The cars form a line of quiet precision. The dining car, the lounge, the sleepers, the porter's movements in and out of the corridors. All of it feels organized, composed, and slightly timeless. The train is no longer carrying its passengers through the West, but it still carries the memory of that motion within it. And not all of the passengers leave immediately. Some remain aboard for a while, reluctant to let the experience end. In the sleeping cars, bags are unpacked or left partly closed. In the lounge, a few conversations continue in low tones. Someone may be looking out into the city lights, which appear different now, after so many hours of desert darkness. Los Angeles has its own kind of brightness, less harsh than the desert sun, more scattered, more human, more electric. For travelers who have crossed from Chicago through the plains, the mountains, and the long Southwest, this glow can feel almost unreal. The Super Chief had a talent for making every stage of the journey feel distinct. Morning on the plains was one world. Lunch through New Mexico was another. Evening in the desert was another still. And now the city at the end of the line becomes its own atmosphere entirely. A place where the train's refinement meets the broader rhythm of urban life. The transition is graceful, but it is also unmistakable. The long distance of the continent has finally resolved into city streets. There is, however, still a practical side to all this glamour. The train must be serviced. The crews must prepare it for its next journey. Clean linens are replaced, tables are reset. The dining car is readied again because the super chief was not meant to rest forever in one place. It was part of a living schedule, a system that connected the country on a regular basis. While one set of passengers arrived, another departure was already being imagined. That constant renewal gave the train a sense of vitality. This was never a static luxury object. It was a working masterpiece. The staff understood that very well. The porters, stewards, dining car crews, and other employees had the kind of professional discipline that made such a service possible. Their work was invisible when done well, which meant that passengers often experienced only the result: smoothness, comfort, anticipation, and calm. But behind that ease was a great amount of labor, perfectly coordinated. That invisible labor was part of the train's dignity. In the station district, the city sounds continue in the background. Cars pass. A distant horn is heard. Light glints from glass and metal. The night is warm compared with the cooler air that greeted passengers in the early morning at departure. Here, in California, the climate itself seems to welcome the traveler. It does not feel like an ending so much as an opening into a different pace of life. And yet, for many passengers, the strongest memory will remain the journey rather than the destination. That is the secret of the Super Chief. A person remembers not just the cities, but the sequence. The first coffee of the morning, the changing sky over Kansas, the lunch service as the land grew more open, the quiet crossing of the Continental Divide, the deepening desert light, the final approach through California, and then this, the soft glow of Los Angeles at night. The journey becomes a chain of sensations, each one distinct, each one linked by the steady movement of the train. By now it is easy to see why the Super Chief became such a powerful symbol. It represented the modern American belief that distance could be mastered without being diminished. It showed that a long journey across the country did not have to mean fatigue, inconvenience, or discomfort. It could mean rhythm, elegance, and a sense of participation in the vastness of the nation. Riding the train was not only practical, it was cultural, it was aspirational. It was, in a very real sense, an experience of America itself. And in Los Angeles, that ideal became especially vivid. The city at the western end of the line had its own mythology: sunshine, studios, coastline, growth, reinvention. The train arrived there not as a relic of another age, but as a perfect partner to modernity. It delivered passengers into the heart of a world that valued image, speed, comfort, and style, precisely the qualities the Super Chief had perfected. As the night deepens, the platform grows quieter. Passengers who are leaving have gone. Those who remain are preparing to sleep or to depart later. The train's windows reflect the station lamps, and the surrounding city glow. The corridor lights remain warm and steady. Somewhere inside, a porter makes one final round. The sleeping cars settle into silence. The dining car is cleaned and readied. The lounge is emptied of conversation. The whole train seems to breathe more slowly now. This is the rare stillness that only follows motion. And perhaps that is what the traveler remembers most strongly at the end. Not simply the arrival, but the calm, that comes after having crossed so much country in such complete comfort. The Super Chief made distance feel human. It gave the passenger a place in the landscape, a place in time, and a sense that travel could be more than movement from one point to another. It could be an art. When the train is finally ready for its next journey, it will leave Los Angeles with the same polished confidence it carried into the station. It will go back across the desert, through the mountains, over the plains, and on to Chicago again. The route will repeat, but never feel identical. Different passengers, different weather, different light, different moments at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Different memories made in the quiet spaces between stations. That is why the Super Chief lives so vividly in the imagination. It was not just one trip. It was a promise repeated across the years that the West could be crossed in comfort, that elegance could be mobile, and that the long American route could be made beautiful. And so, in the Los Angeles night, the train rests with dignity, waiting for the next dawn. There was a time when the Super Chief was not merely a train. It was a statement. To ride it was to enter a world of polished motion, exact service, and quiet prestige. By the height of its fame, the train had become one of the most recognizable symbols of long-distance luxury travel in America. It represented a very particular ideal, that speed and elegance could live together, that the country could be crossed without sacrificing comfort, and that a journey itself could become part of one's public image. This was the golden age of the Super Chief. The route between Chicago and Los Angeles had already given the train its legendary character: the plains, the mountains, the desert, the long western light. But what truly elevated it in the public imagination was the company it kept. The Super Chief became closely associated with a world of celebrities, executives, politicians, writers, and travelers who valued not just transportation, but distinction. Its nickname, the Train of the Stars, was more than a piece of publicity. It reflected a genuine pattern of use and a genuine aura. Hollywood figures rode it, studio executives rode it, business leaders, entertainers, and prominent public figures were often seen aboard. For many of them, the Super Chief offered something rare: privacy without isolation, glamour without excess, and enough time to move between worlds while remaining entirely themselves. That mattered in the age of train travel. A famous person on an airplane was simply a passenger in the sky. A famous person on the Super Chief was a figure in a moving social theater. There was a corridor to walk, a dining car to enter, a lounge to inhabit, a sleeper to retreat into. There were porters who knew when to be discreet, stewards who could anticipate needs without intrusion, and a rhythm of travel that allowed the whole experience to feel composed rather than exposed. The train gave its passengers a temporary stage, but when softened by privacy and class, one can imagine the scene easily. A star steps onto the platform in Chicago or Los Angeles, dressed carefully, accompanied by luggage handled by the crew. The newspapers notice, photographs may be taken, but once aboard, the train offers a different world. Wood-paneled interiors, quiet voices, soft lamps, and the sense that the journey itself has been placed under elegant control. That blend of visibility and discretion was part of the Super Chief's power. It let the famous be seen, but not overwhelmed. It let ordinary passengers share the same space as celebrities, but in a manner that still felt orderly and dignified. The train was democratic in a way, but never casual. Everyone was welcomed into the same high standard of service, and because of that, the experience carried a unique social texture. The Golden Age was also the era when the train's details mattered most. The Fred Harvey Company was central to that reputation. Its disciplined, gracious service gave the Super Chief a level of polish that passengers remembered long after arrival. Meals were not simply meals. They were events. Tables were set with care. Service moved with quiet precision. The experience of dining aboard became one of the defining pleasures of the route. And then, there was the visual identity of the train. The Southwestern styling designed into the dining service, especially through the work of Mary Coulter, gave the Super Chief a personality that was unmistakable. The china and tableware were not generic luxury objects. They were rooted in the region. The motifs drew from Mimbre's design traditions, with animal figures and geometric forms that echoed the deep history of the Southwest. In this way, even a dinner aboard the train felt like a cultural experience rather than merely a culinary one. That was crucial to the train's Golden Age success. Passengers did not just remember that the service was excellent, they remembered that it felt meaningful. The train was modern but not sterile, glamorous but not flashy, comfortable but not anonymous. It was a long-distance rail service that seemed to understand that true luxury lies in coherence. When the food, the furniture, the route, the scenery, and the staff all belonged to the same story. That story appealed to the famous just as much as to the wealthy or the well-traveled. For Hollywood figures, the Super Chief connected two powerful American mythologies: the glamour of the film industry and the romance of the open West. It was natural in a sense that actors and entertainers would be associated with it. The train linked Chicago, the great Midwestern hub, with Los Angeles, the city of image and performance. The route itself mirrored a cultural crossing from one kind of national identity to another, and the train made that crossing feel smooth. Its famous passengers were not all movie stars, of course. Over the years, the Super Chief carried a wide range of notable people: business figures, public officials, journalists, authors, and others, whose work required regular travel between major American cities. But the Hollywood connection gave the train a special place in popular memory. It became part of the image of the era: the sleek train under station lights, the stars stepping aboard, the long journey west under private lamps and polished service. That image mattered because it shaped aspiration. Even people who never rode the Super Chief understood what it stood for. It was not merely a train for the rich. It was a standard of excellence. It suggested that modern travel could still have grace. It suggested that America, vast and industrial and fast-moving, could also produce something beautiful and measured. During the 1930s, 1940s, and beyond, that mattered deeply. The country was changing quickly. Air travel was coming. Automobiles were growing in importance. But the Super Chief held on to something else: the belief that the rail journey could still be the most civilized way to cross the continent. Its reputation was built not only on speed, but on the feeling that every mile had been curated, that the traveler was not being rushed but carried. This is part of why the train remained so famous for so long. It was not just nostalgia. It was performance of a very high order. Every departure from Chicago or Los Angeles was a carefully staged beginning. Every dinner car service, every sleeping compartment, every lounge conversation contributed to the larger impression that the Super Chief had mastered the art of long-distance motion. And because so many notable people chose it, the train accumulated a kind of social gravity. To say that someone had ridden the Super Chief was to say that they belonged to a world of taste and confidence. It signaled a certain standard, a certain elegance, a certain recognition that travel, properly done, was part of life's larger style. There is something striking about that now. In an age when speed is often stripped of ceremony, The Super Chief reminds us that transit once had ritual. There was a time when boarding a train could feel like entering a carefully composed chapter of one's life. Departure was an event. Dining was part of the journey's architecture. Even silence had a role to play. The famous passengers understood this instinctively. They were not simply moving from one place to another. They were inhabiting a setting that reflected their own public identities. For an actor, the train reinforced glamour. For a politician, it suggested seriousness and reach. For a writer or journalist, it offered a place to observe America in motion. For a businessman, it combined practicality and prestige. But for everyone aboard, famous or not, the train offered the same essential promise. That distance could be traversed with dignity. That was the golden age, at its best. Not only the age of celebrity, but the age of a shared belief in standards, in service, in design, in schedule, in atmosphere. The Super Chief embodied those standards so well that it became larger than the route itself. It became a kind of moving emblem of mid-century American refinement. And yet, perhaps the deepest reason the train endured in memory is simpler than all of that. It made people feel special, not in the empty sense of exclusivity, but in the richer sense that they were participating in something carefully made. Whether one was a Hollywood star, a newspaper editor, a traveling salesman, or a family heading west for a new life, the train gave the journey a certain nobility. It said that crossing the continent could still be an event worth dressing for, dining through, and remembering. That is what the Super Chief meant in its golden age. It was the rail car equivalent of a well-cut suit, a beautifully set table, and a horizon that seemed to open with purpose. It was modern America, but with manners. And for those who rode it, the famous and the simply fortunate alike, it remained one of the finest ways ever devised to see the country pass by. In the end, every great journey becomes a story, and every great story, if it survives long enough, becomes an object that can be held, opened, closed, and placed back into silence. Somewhere in an old library, a library with tall windows, worn wooden floors, and the faint smell of dust, paper, and time, there is a shelf where this history now rests. It is not the only book there, of course. Around it stand other volumes. Railway histories, city memoirs, atlases, hotel guides, photographs of stations long vanished, and accounts of a country that used to understand distance differently. But this one has its own quiet presence. Its spine is slightly faded now, the lettering softened by age. The cloth cover has lost some of its brightness, but not its dignity. When the librarian's hand brushes past it, the book remains still, waiting. It does not ask to be remembered loudly. It only asks to be opened. And when it is opened, the pages begin again. Chicago appears first, as it always does. The great beginning, the city of departure, the place where steam, steel, and ambition met at the platform. Then Kansas City, then the Long Plains, then Newton, Dodge City, La Junta, Raton, Las Vegas, Albuquerque. Then the sweep into Arizona, the desert light, the dry horizon, the western silence. Then Needles, Barstow, San Bernardino, Pasadena. Then Los Angeles, glowing at the end of the line. Then the station at night. Then the famous passengers. Then the golden age. Then the name that still seems to ring in the air, Super Chief. The book contains all of it. Not as motion, of course, but as memory arranged into language. That is what books do best. They preserve what no longer moves. They hold the shape of vanished things. They let the reader imagine the sound of wheels on rail, the softness of dining car lamps, the polished wood of a compartment, the quiet walk of a porter, the sweep of the desert outside a window. They let the past remain available not as fact alone, but as atmosphere. And that is fitting, because the Super Chief was always an atmosphere as much as a train. Its power was never only in speed or luxury. It was in the feeling it created, the sense that travel could be composed like music, that a long line across the continent could become a graceful arc, that the American West could be crossed not in hardship, but in style. The train made geography feel meaningful. It made distance feel like part of the pleasure. It made time feel arranged. In the library, the book remembers all of that. Its pages hold the social world of the train. The stars, the executives, the families, the journalists, the travelers who saw in it a promise of something better than ordinary transit. It remembers the Fred Harvey service, exact and elegant. It remembers Mary Coulter's designs with their Southwestern motifs and deep regional character. It remembers the Mimbres imagery, and the way even a dining service could carry history in its patterning. It remembers the phrase "train of the stars," and how fitting it felt in a nation that liked its glamour with a touch of precision. But most of all, the book remembers movement, because a train is always more than its stations. It is the spaces between them, the dawns, the meals, the pauses, the glances out the window, the changing colors of the sky, the passing of states, the shifting of climate and culture and expectation. The Super Chief knew this better than almost any other train of its era. That is why it lived so strongly in memory. It was not just a machine that connected two cities. It was a continuous experience of the American continent. And now, that experience lives in the book. A reader can take it down, open it, and travel again. The journey begins as words, but soon the words become something else. A platform at night, a whistle in the distance, a window framed by curtains, a steward speaking softly, a dining car shining under lamps, a desert crossing under a pale sky. The book does not replace the train, it rescues it. For the old library understands something important. What is gone is not necessarily lost. It can survive in pages, in photographs, in recollection, in the careful arrangement of sentences. And so, the Super Chief, which once moved with such confidence through the American West, now rests in a different kind of permanence, not on rails, but on paper, not beneath station lamps, but under the dim gold light of a reading room, not carrying passengers, but carrying memory. The shelf around it is quiet, other books stand nearby, each with its own history, each with its own vanished world. But this one feels especially alive because it remembers motion so vividly. Its stillness is only surface. Inside, the route is always happening. Chicago is always departing, the desert is always glowing. Los Angeles is always arriving at dusk. The stars are always boarding. The dining car is always being set for supper. The train is always moving west. That is what makes the final image so fitting. A book about the Super Chief belongs in a library because a library is where time is organized into forms that can be returned to. It is where the past is not erased, only shelved. It is where a great journey can wait patiently for the next reader to lift it into light. And perhaps, in that old library, there is one more detail worth imagining. The shelf is tall and the book is placed just slightly above eye level, among volumes whose titles have nearly vanished. The room is empty except for the hush of air and the soft turning of pages somewhere far away. A ray of afternoon light falls across the shelf. It touches the spine of the book that holds the story of the Super Chief. For a moment, the faded lettering seems to brighten. Then the light shifts. The shelf returns to shadow. The book remains, waiting. For this journey helped you slow down and drift into silence, visit the channel Slumber of Centuries.